for watching 7th Circle Gaming, and what are we going to be talking about today? We're going to be discussing the game Bombshell. And we'll get started here like we always do with the full disclosure, and you are cordially invited to pause the video now and read through these at your leisure, or if you prefer not to, don't pause and we'll jump right into the screenshots. The first one that we'd like to share with you is just meant to illustrate what the game world itself looks like. This is from the second area that players are going to move through, but that's not terribly important. What is worth noting on this particular screen is the user interface. On the top left, we see the health meter and a shield meter that looks vaguely reminiscent of another game. And on the bottom left, that's the ammunition counter and various other sort of cooldown timers. On the bottom right is the mini-map, and on the top right are the objectives. The world itself is meant to be some sort of an alien world. Not terribly relatable, but that's all there is to say about that. And let's move right along to our second screenshot, which is one of the other things that is a primary end of Bombshell, and that is upgrading the character. And players are going to be spending a lot of time on this screen, as much as they are with the inventory, but obviously, from accruing XP, players will earn upgrade points that are fed into one of the abilities or the individual character attributes. With that said, that's really all there is to say, and we'll move right on and let's start compiling things into scores. The first chapter that we always have is Immersion, which asks the question, what does the game do to get players invested in the game world? And Bombshell is earning a 7 out of 15 for Immersion. It tries with presentation. It's told through an isometric perspective and an alien world, modern levels, as we saw earlier. Really not in terms of relatability. It's not all that relatable, but it shouldn't be out of the ordinary or out of what players familiar with the science fiction genre will be used to. The game is also going to attempt to use combat to get players invested into the game world. Often this takes the form of mobs of enemies, and surrounding environmental hazards, or in small areas. The game is also going to attempt to use player agency to get players invested in the game world, much like what we saw with that second screenshot. That's really the point of sharing that with you, is that is illustrating the upgrade paths that the skill points, for want of a better phrase, feed into. We can also sort of attach the earning new weapons, purchasing new attachments, what those will feed toward. We could, in vague terms, if we wanted to, call that character customization. The game is also going to attempt to use statistics focus to get players invested into the game world, because in any sort of role-playing game, in-game objects have statistics attached to them, which will feed into the other systems like player agency, combat, and not so much presentation, but in some ways story, which is the other thing that the game really does try to do to get players invested into the game world. It's a smaller part of the immersion tree from what we found during our evaluation, but we'll come back to that a little bit later. For now, though, we do want to move on to difficulty. And when players start up a new campaign, This is the difficulty options that they're going to see. The first one is normal, second one is hard. And the description of how that is going to affect gameplay is very, very vague. Describing it as a good challenge, and in case you're really curious, if the player mouse is over hard, the description changes to a gooder challenge, which is terribly, terribly vague. So what does Bombshell earn for its difficulty score? Unfortunately, Bombshell is earning a 2.5 out of 15. In all of our evaluation sessions, the game does seem to slightly favor the gamepad over mouse and keyboard. It is entirely possible that a player that is very familiar with playing twin-stick shooters with a mouse and keyboard, or a player who uses a custom key setup, custom key bindings rather, will find that more to their liking. But using the default key bindings, we did find that a gamepad seemed to be slightly favored. The action commands were fairly simple. We did notice one graphical glitch. It might be particular to this setup, but it did incorrectly attribute the cooldown timer to the movement ability and not the medikit. Something to be aware of. It did correctly remove the medikits from the inventory, but it did incorrectly attribute to the cooldown timer. And that was only a graphical oddity. We could, of course, use medikits immediately. There were, as you saw earlier, few options for difficulty, and they are very vaguely described, and so a 2.5 out of 15 is what Bombshell earns. And with that, we're going to move on to Lasting Appeal and ask the question of what is it that's going to keep players coming back to this game and what's going to keep it installed on hard drives for the longer term. Is there any sort of method that the game really wants players to play it with, like a specific time? No. On that note, the game has earned a 5 out of 15. There are two methods to engage with the game. There's the campaign, and there's a challenge mode. It's also possible to replay the game on higher difficulty settings. Unfortunately, though, there are no mods and there is no DLC available for the game. Some players may engage with the story, but it's really a simple gameplay, not too dissimilar to other open world games where players uncover quests and then complete the quest and return with the results to the quest giver. And so a 5 out of 15 is what Bombshell has earned for Lasting Appeal. And that's going to bring us to our final category, which is overall score. Overall, Bombshell has earned a 4.83 out of 15. And we will say that during our evaluation, we did uncover one technical glitch that forced a restart of the game. It seemed to be a graphics driver issue, so do be sure before starting up the game that the graphics drivers are current. It is possible to play through the game, again, as we noted, with a mouse and keyboard, although players may find that it favors a very different playstyle over a gamepad. Basically, what that comes down to, if we're going to be very subjective, is that with a mouse and keyboard, players are may find area effect weapons more useful than the more precise weapons that a gamepad can be used, or can be used with a gamepad. Now, if we continue on with that streak of subjectivity, we will say that the game's story could be interpreted in a couple of different ways. and that's what we were hinting at with all of those notes about the story. It is possible that players who engage with the story could find that the story is significantly darker than it appears on the surface. But of course, that's highly subjective, so take that with grains of salt over both shoulders, and whatever other cautionary caveats that you'd like to include. And that's really all there is to say about Bombshell. So we'll just congratulate you for watching all the way to the end of the video. If you did and you have played Bombshell on your own, please leave any comments about it in the comments section provided. Also, if you do have any suggestions for other games that you'd like to see, I do read all of the comments and will carefully consider all of the suggestions. Otherwise, from 7th Circle Gaming, goodbye.